Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Kia Sangria here. Thank you so much for clicking into this video. Today we're going to be discussing patterns, specifically sewing patterns or sewing patterns that can be used for cosplay. This is a topic that I have wanted to talk about for quite some time on this channel just because I've done some digging around the net and I've also asked some of you guys questions on Twitter and things of that nature, and in my Instagram story polls about what are the things that you struggle with when it comes to like sewing your own costumes or just like in general. So I'm going to touch on some of those things in this video here. I went on Twitter and I asked people, what are some of your struggles when it comes to like sewing things, because I know that when it comes to like sewing cosplay, it's still something that confuses a lot of people in the community, and it's either like too hard or too difficult, or they just don't know where to start. So I kind of wanted to talk about patterns specifically because when people did respond to those questions that I asked, they told me that they did not like using patterns. They just hated them. They didn't fit right. They weren't great. And that is fair for people to feel because I once felt like that too, but there was a little bit more education needed on my part so that I can learn how to properly use a pattern for my costumes, and it has made all of the difference. So I'm gonna go through a list of all of the things that I think might be happening to some of you guys, and these are coming from experience. So even though I'm talking to you guys about this list, these are mistakes that I was making too very early on when I first started sewing cosplay. So I kind of want to demystify this issue for all of us, for everyone watching. One thing that you should know about patterns is that one size does not fit all. I would like to say that Simplicity and McCall's and all the big four pattern companies are getting better at making patterns for multiple sizes, which is awesome. We love to see it, but there's still a lot of work to go. One thing that I'm really happy about is the fact that we now have patterns specifically for cosplay. Thank you, Yaya Han, for all the work that you put in working with McCall's to create patterns. I'm actually going to touch on one of her patterns later on. But yeah, there's a ton of patterns out there for cosplay now, and I think that that's really awesome because I think maybe like 10 years ago we didn't have that at all. There was no superhero spandex suit pattern. There were no My Hero patterns. My Hero didn't exist, but there are patterns for like My Hero Academia costumes and things of that nature. So we have a lot of tools at our fingertips now to make cosplay, and I really want to encourage more people to pick up these tools and use them because I think these are some really awesome things. So in defense of sewing patterns, let's go through some of the mistakes that you guys are making and I sometimes still make. Number one, reading pattern instructions. I have to admit, I sometimes still struggle with actually reading the instructions on a pattern through and through, or as I'm working on something. Sometimes I think I know better and it's just like, oh, I don't need to read that. But then I mess up, and then it's just like, if I had just sat down and like read the instructions properly, I would have seen that the mistake that I made could have been completely avoided if I had just like read through my pattern and read to understand, not just read to skim. And I still make this mistake, and I'm sure some of you guys too are making this mistake at home. Read the pattern instructions. It's very important to making sure that the garment fits and that it wears the way that like you want it to. So like right here, I'm actually wearing a top that I made. I made this top during the summer, and it's a little tight in the bust area, but that's because I wasn't paying attention to the width of the dart that it asked me to make on the bust for it to be fitted. So again, like read those instructions. They are there for a reason. Number two, you don't understand darts or seam allowances. Darts and seam allowance are things that are marked on a pattern. It's marked in the instructions as well, but if you don't understand what those things are, you will have trouble. So sometimes even if you go out and you purchase a pattern, you still have to do a little bit of research to figure out exactly, what is a dart? What type of seam allowance do I need to have for this? What is a seam allowance if you don't know what that is? There's still research to be done on your part as well when it comes to like using a pattern. So like for this dress right here, this dress actually has 4 darts. It has a dart from the side seam, and then it has a dart from the bottom of the bust. And, oh, let's just turn her around here. She also has a dart on the back seam. So this bodice has 6 darts, 3 darts per side. So darts are necessary to make something more fitted. Like, I don't know if you guys can see like how fitted the back is here and then how fitted the bust here is on the mannequin, but that's what darts are there to do. Darts are there to make sure that curved seams sit flush against the body. So it's very important that you guys understand these things when you're making certain garments and certain costumes. It's so important, and please, you need to do your research on your own if you don't understand what the pattern is telling you. Number 3, you don't know your own measurements. And that is a problem. When working with the pattern, you need to know your measurements through and through, or else you're not going to have a good fit. So for example, for this dress, I cut a size 10 for the bodice, but for the bottom of the skirt, I cut a size 14 just to make room for my hips. So one of the mistakes that I used to make very early on is I would look at my bust measurement when looking at a pattern. So here's like a Yaya Han pattern here. And normally your measurement instructions will be here, or sometimes they're on the back, but in this case, they're here. So one of the mistakes that I would make is that I would look at the bust measurement and I would think, oh, well, based on my bust, it says to cut a size 12. So, okay, I'll just cut a size 12 throughout the whole pattern. That doesn't work, because for a size 12 on this pattern, it says a bust of 32.5 inches. So even if I go with the 32.5 inches for the bust, that measurement does not translate to my hips. My hips and my bust are not the same measurement. And so when you're working with the pattern, you need to know your measurements, your correct measurements for each part of your body that the pattern takes into account. So with this pattern, this is the pattern that I used to create my Beetlejuice costume. If you haven't seen my Beetlejuice costume, go and check out my makeup video for Beetlejuice. That was like my Halloween makeup video, but this is a 3-piece pattern. So this pattern consists, bring it closer. This pattern consists of a bolero, a corset, and a skirt. So for me, when I cut this pattern, for the bolero, I cut a size 12. For the corset, I cut a size 10 because a corset has negative ease, and I've talked about that in another video as well. For the skirt, I cut a size 14 because this skirt, I want to say it's more like a trumpet skirt, but it's very like fitted in the hips, and then it like flays out for like a mermaid style. So I cut a size 14 because I needed to have space for my hips. But as you can see, it was one pattern, but I had to cut 3 different sizes in order to make sure that the pattern fits. The only way that I was able to know to do that now, which I didn't know then, is that I had to know my measurements for my bust, my waist, and my hip. So it's very important that you guys understand and know your own measurements. Number 4, you believe patterns are a one-size-fits-all. That is not the case. You can also make modifications to patterns if they don't fit your measurements as they are. I would hate for someone to experience having to purchase a pattern that goes into one range of sizes and then purchase another one that goes into another range. Patterns just unfortunately don't always work, and it really sucks if they don't. But when they don't work, you can make adjustments as necessary as long as you feel comfortable doing that. And there are tons of tutorials online on how to grade patterns up or how to grade patterns down to find a way for it to work for you. Patterns are not one size fits all, and so it does take a lot of knowledge and education and going out there and learning how to work with patterns and how to make them work for you. So I really do suggest that you try that if you're having trouble trying to rework a pattern. This dress right here, what is that? This dress right here is based off a simplicity pattern for a Wednesday Addams dress. What I did was I just lengthened the skirt here. Like myself, I added, I think 6 inches to this skirt. So, but that's because I went out and I learned how to grade patterns up and down and add things to it as needed. So I really suggest you guys do the same in order to make this, the pattern work for you. Just so you guys know, this costume right here is actually my Eclipse dress from Star versus the Forces of Evil. I felt like the Wednesday Addams dress pattern was absolutely perfect for modifying and making this costume, and it came out perfectly. So love that for me. Number 5, the final tip that I'm going to cover today, or advice, or rather the things that like we struggle with, that I struggle with, that you may struggle with, is just not being equipped with the correct tools for the pattern or the costume that you're making. Different fabrics require different things. You know, for example, with spandex, you may need a stretch needle. Your all-purpose needle may not help you when it comes to like sewing something that is made out of a very stretchy material. So you need like a ballpoint needle or a stretch needle. Or if you're working with a heavier fabric, you may need a leather needle. You may need to use a twin needle depending on the garment. So sometimes when we're making something, we start something, it's not just like the pattern and the measurements that we also have to have knowledge of. We also need to know what type of tools we need to make this. Proper thread. Make sure that you're actually using fabrics that the pattern itself suggests. You know, if you have a pattern that calls for like a stretch fabric and they call, oh, we need a stretch fabric, you can't then go out and pick up cotton or whatever to make this costume. You need to look at what the pattern is suggesting. And if you decide to deviate a little bit, I think that that's fine. I mean, if I have a pattern that's telling me to use a 4-way stretch spandex and, you know, all I have is 2-way stretch, I can probably still use that 2-way stretch fabric. I just need to account for the fact that this fabric is not stretching in all directions, and then I need to cut accordingly. Also, another thing I want to go into, which kind of goes back to reading instructions, make sure you're cutting your fabric, like your patterns, make sure that you're laying your patterns properly on your fabric. I have wasted so much fabric cutting patterns out however I wanted to, however I felt like it, and ignoring the instructions completely. This will save yourself some time. And I noticed that, I don't remember who on Twitter told me, I'm not going to call you out. I remember someone on Twitter telling me that like they've cut out the pattern pieces, but then they ran out of fabric. And when I asked, I was just like, hey, you know, did you actually get the amount of fabric that the pattern itself called for? Like, did you look at the back and, you know, it said how many yards you need? Did you go out and buy that amount? She's like, yeah, that's exactly what I got. And I'm like, well, did you lay the pattern pieces out on the fabric, like as instructed? And they didn't. And that's kind of what'll get you there. And also, again, going back to reading your pattern, there may be separate cutting instructions based on the length and width of the fabric that you have. So pay attention to that. And if you're shopping for fabric in store or you're shopping online, try to see if you can find that information. What is the length and width of this fabric? Because even on the back of the pattern, it will actually give you certain instructions for different amounts of fabric that you may need based on those measurements. So very helpful to ask for that information. All right, guys, so yeah, that's where I'm going to end today's video. I really hope that this information helped you. I feel like I was honestly talking to like 16-year-old me in this video, because these are things that I didn't even consider when I first started like playing around with my sewing machine. Like not even just making cosplay at the time, but just playing around with my sewing machine. I never like thought about any of these things because there was no one to teach me, and that's okay because I eventually figured it out through trial and error. But I'm trying to save you guys from some of the mistakes that I made when it comes to sewing with patterns. I think patterns are really great. If you don't like them or you find success just, you know, creating patterns yourself, all the power to you, because I, at this point in time, do not know how to design patterns. I mean, I guess I could if I actually like tried to do so, but I have actually never really attempted to like make my own pattern for anything, just because I was always able to like go out and find a pattern for whatever it is that I was trying to make. So if you make your own patterns, like power to you. Maybe like drop a comment and give me some advice on how I can do the same thing, because as of right now, I really don't do it. But I think that there are so many patterns out there for cosplayers to use to build almost everything. And I really think more of you should like take advantage of like these patterns that are out here. And once again, thank Yaya Han from working with McCall's. I used to have a lot of trouble with her patterns actually, and I used to complain so much, like, what is with this pattern? Like, why does this not work? And now that I know better how to work with patterns and what certain terms mean, like ease and all those things, I have a easier time using her patterns. And so for any of you that have ever struggled with like a Yaya Han pattern, I have been there. I've actually like asked her at Comic-Con once too. I was like, I tried like sewing this and it just did not work out. Like, do you have any advice for that? Because like I don't understand the pattern. And she was able to give me some like better advice on like how she does it herself. But yeah, I think once you guys learn the basics of like working with patterns, you'll have such an easier time, and it'll be a lot of fun, and you'll be really excited about the things that you make. And so yeah, that's where I want to leave today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching this. If you have any questions about patterns or where I get patterns or anything related to like sewing cosplay, please leave a comment down below. Maybe I can make another video for you guys going more in depth about those things, but I will be sure to answer you guys in the comment section regardless. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.